David never thought his life would turn into something straight out of a science fiction movie. He was just a regular guy who spent his days studying alien plants and microorganisms in a lab. Simple life, simple routine, no drama. That's exactly how he liked it. But the year 2157 had other plans for him. 3 months ago, Earth made first contact with aliens, not the scary invasion kind from movies. These were peaceful beings called Lyrians who actually wanted to be friends with humans. Governments around the world went crazy trying to figure out how to handle this. After endless meetings and discussions, they came up with something called the Cultural Exchange Program. The idea was simple enough. Pair up humans with aliens for a year, have them live together, learn about each other, and prove that different species could get along. It sounded good on paper. David thought it was interesting when he heard about it on the news. He just never imagined it would involve him. He was in his lab one Tuesday afternoon examining samples under his microscope when his supervisor called him into the office. The conversation that followed changed everything. "David, you've been selected for the companionship protocol," his supervisor said, sliding a folder across the desk. David blinked. "The what now?" "The Alien Exchange Program. You're being paired with a Lyrian partner for 1 year." The room started spinning. David felt his stomach drop. "Wait, what? I didn't sign up for this." "It's a random selection from all government employees in the science division. Congratulations." "Congratulations?" David wanted to laugh. He was 32 years old and had successfully avoided serious relationships his entire adult life. He buried himself in work, kept his circle small, and never let anyone get too close. The idea of suddenly living with someone, especially someone from another planet, felt like a nightmare. But there was no way out. The program was mandatory for selected participants. Something about international cooperation and the future of humanity. David had 1 week to pack his things and report to the Interstellar Integration Facility. That week passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. The facility was a massive complex on the outskirts of the city. All white walls and sterile corridors that smelled like disinfectant and fresh paint. David arrived with a single suitcase, feeling like he was checking into a prison rather than starting some grand cultural experiment. A cheerful coordinator led him through endless hallways, explaining rules and regulations that David barely heard over the sound of his own racing heartbeat. Finally, they stopped in front of a plain white door. "Your match is waiting inside," the coordinator said with an encouraging smile. "Don't worry, we've done extensive compatibility testing. The algorithm suggests you two will get along wonderfully." David seriously doubted any algorithm could predict how he'd feel about living with an alien. He pushed open the door and stepped inside a small meeting room. Standing near the window was the smallest person he'd ever seen. Well, not person exactly. She was definitely alien. She couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. Her skin had this strange lavender color that seemed to shimmer slightly under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes were huge, taking up a good portion of her delicate face, and they were the most striking shade of violet David had ever seen. Her hair, if you could call it that, was silvery and seemed to float around her head like it had a mind of its own. She turned when she heard him enter, and her face broke into a warm smile. "Hello," she said in perfect English, her voice soft and musical. "I'm Zira." David just stood there, frozen like an idiot. Up close, she looked even more alien. Her fingers were longer than human fingers, and her movements had this fluid quality that was both graceful and unsettling. The coordinator stepped forward, oblivious to David's internal panic. "Wonderful. David, Zira, you've been matched as companions for the next 12 months. As of today, you'll be living together as domestic partners." Zira's smile got even brighter. She looked directly at David, her violet eyes twinkling with what might have been amusement. "You've been assigned a wife, and it's me." David noticed her hands were trembling slightly at her sides despite the confident words. So she was nervous too. Somehow that didn't make him feel any better. "Right," David managed to croak out. "Nice to meet you." The coordinator showed them to their assigned apartment, a modest 2-bedroom unit on the 5th floor. It was furnished with standard furniture that looked like it came from a catalog. Nothing personal, nothing interesting. Just a place to exist. "You'll find everything you need here," the coordinator explained. "Kitchen is stocked with both human and Lyrian compatible foods. You'll attend weekly check-ins with our staff and participate in various cultural activities. Any questions?" David had about 1,000,000 questions, but his brain couldn't form any of them into actual words. Zira shook her head politely. "Thank you. We'll be fine. After the coordinator left, silence filled the apartment. David stood in the living room, still holding his suitcase like a shield. Zira stood near the kitchen, her small frame making the standard-sized furniture look enormous around her. "So," Zira said finally, her voice gentle. "This is strange for both of us, yes?" David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Yeah, very strange." "I've studied human culture extensively," Zira continued, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "I know this pairing system is unusual for your species. On Lyria, arranged partnerships are common. But I understand Earth has different traditions. We usually date people before living with them," David said, trying not to sound rude. "You know, get to know them first." A logical approach, Zira nodded. "Perhaps we can think of this as an extended getting-to-know-you period, just happening in reverse order." She was trying to make this easier, David realized. Here she was, probably just as scared and uncomfortable as him, and she was trying to lighten the mood. "Look," David said, setting down his suitcase. "I'm not good at this. People, relationships, any of it. I'm probably going to mess this up a lot." Zira tilted her head in a way that reminded him of a curious bird. "I'm not good at being human. I'll probably mess that up a lot too. Perhaps we can mess up together and learn as we go." Despite everything, David felt a tiny smile tug at his lips. "Deal." They spent the next hour awkwardly dividing up the space. Zira insisted David take the larger bedroom since he was bigger. David felt guilty about that but didn't argue too much. They established that Zira would use the bathroom first in the morning since she needed less time. David would handle the kitchen since Zira admitted she found human cooking appliances confusing. That first night was the longest of David's life. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to strange musical sounds coming from Zira's room. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just unfamiliar. Everything about this situation was unfamiliar. He wondered what he'd gotten himself into. 1 year felt like an eternity. How was he supposed to live with someone he didn't know? Someone who wasn't even human? Someone who probably thought he was as weird as he thought she was? In the other room, Zira lay in her bed, her skin flickering with anxiety in a way only Lyrians did when stressed. She missed home terribly already. Earth's gravity felt just slightly wrong, making her joints ache. The air was too dry. The lights were too bright. And this human she'd been paired with clearly didn't want to be here. But Zira had volunteered for this program for a reason. Back on Lyria, everyone expected her to follow the path they'd chosen for her. Mate with the right person, take the right job, live the right life. She'd felt suffocated by expectations. This program was her escape, her chance to do something meaningful on her own terms. She just had to make it work. Somehow she had to build a bridge between her world and this awkward, closed-off human who looked at her like she might bite. As the night stretched on, both David and Zira lay awake in their separate rooms wondering the same thing. How do you connect with someone from another world when you can barely connect with people from your own? Neither of them knew it yet, but they were about to find out. The first week was a disaster. David discovered that living with Zira was like trying to share space with someone who operated on a completely different frequency. Everything about her was foreign, from the way she moved to the way she communicated to the way she existed in the world. She hummed constantly. Not songs exactly, just this low melodic vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. It happened when she was cooking, when she was reading, when she was just sitting on the couch. At first, David thought maybe it was how Lyrians talk to themselves, but when he asked, Zira looked embarrassed. "It's a comfort behavior," she explained, her lavender skin darkening slightly in what he'd learned was the Lyrian equivalent of blushing, like when humans tap their fingers or pace. "I didn't realize I was doing it." "Does it bother you?" David almost said yes, but caught himself. "I'm just not used to it." Zira nodded and went quiet for the rest of the evening. The silence was somehow worse than the humming. David felt like a jerk, but didn't know how to fix it. Then there was the food situation. Zira's meals looked like they belonged in a glow-in-the-dark museum exhibit. Everything she ate had this faint bioluminescent quality that made David's stomach turn. One morning, he walked into the kitchen to find her eating what looked like glowing blue jelly for breakfast. "What is that?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Kella fruit preserve," Zira said cheerfully. "It's quite nutritious. Would you like to try some?" "I'm good with my toast, thanks." He saw the disappointment flash across her face before she hid it behind another smile. Strike two for being a terrible roommate. But the weirdest thing was the touching. Lyrians apparently experienced the world through touch in a way humans didn't. Zira would run her long fingers over furniture, walls, books, anything within reach. She explained that she could sense emotional residue from objects, feel the history of things through contact. Every object carries an echo of the beings who've touched it, she told him one afternoon, her hand pressed against the kitchen counter. This counter has been touched by many nervous humans. People cooking their first meals in new homes. Lots of hope mixed with uncertainty. David thought it sounded like nonsense but kept that opinion to himself. The problem was, Zira wanted to touch everything to understand it, including apparently him. She'd reach out to touch his arm when talking, trying to sense his emotional state. Every time it happened, David would freeze up or pull away. He saw the hurt in her eyes each time, but he couldn't help it. He wasn't a touchy person, and having an alien reading his emotions through skin contact felt invasive. For her part, Zira was struggling just as much. Earth's gravity was stronger than Lyria's, making her feel heavy and tired all the time. The air was too thick with oxygen, giving her headaches. Human food smelled strange to her sensitive nose, and David's emotional walls were higher than any structure on her home planet. She'd been raised to believe that building bridges between species was the highest calling a Lyrian could pursue. Her people valued connection, empathy, and understanding above all else. But how could she build a bridge to someone who actively avoided connection? 2 weeks in, things came to a head over something stupid. David came home from a mandatory facility workshop to find Zira had rearranged the living room furniture. "What did you do?" he asked, staring at the new configuration. "I optimized the energy flow," Zira explained, looking proud of herself. Lyrian spatial harmony principles. The furniture was blocking positive energy pathways, but everything was fine where it was. It was adequate. Now it's harmonious. David felt frustration bubbling up. "Zira, you can't just change things without asking. This is my space too." "Our space," Zira corrected gently. "And I thought I was helping, making it better for both of us. By making decisions without me?" Zira's skin flickered with agitation. "You're upset because I moved furniture? This seems disproportionate." "It's not about the furniture. It's about the constant humming, the glowing food, the touching everything, the changing things. It's all just too much." The words came out harsher than David intended. He watched Zira's face fall, her violet eyes going wide and hurt. For a moment she just stood there, small and vulnerable in the middle of the harmoniously arranged living room. "I see," she said quietly. "I'm too much. Too alien. Too difficult to live with." "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Zira's voice cracked slightly. "You pull away every time I try to connect. You won't try my food. You hate my humming. You don't want me to touch anything. What exactly about me do you find tolerable?" David opened his mouth, but no words came out. She was right. He'd been treating her like an inconvenience instead of a person. Someone who'd left her entire world behind to be here, just like the program had asked. "I'm trying my best," Zira continued, tears making her eyes shine even brighter. "I know I'm not human. I know I'm strange to you. But I'm trying to learn, trying to adapt, trying to make this work. You're not trying at all. You're just tolerating me until the year is up." She was right about that, too. David had been counting down the days since he arrived, marking time until he could return to his normal life and forget this whole uncomfortable experience. "I'm going to my room," Zira said when David didn't respond. "I'll try to be less bothersome tomorrow." She disappeared into her bedroom, and David heard the door click shut with a finality that made his chest ache. He stood alone in the rearranged living room, feeling like the worst person in the galaxy. Looking around with fresh eyes, he had to admit the furniture layout actually did feel better. The couch faced the window now, letting in natural light. The chairs were positioned for conversation rather than television watching. It was thoughtful, not intrusive. Everything Zira had done had been thoughtful. The humming was her trying to feel comfortable in a strange place. The glowing food was her maintaining a connection to home. The touching was how her species understood the world. And he'd made her feel terrible for all of it. David's mom used to tell him he built walls instead of bridges. She'd died when he was 12, and he'd been building walls ever since. It was easier than risking getting hurt again, but Zira wasn't trying to hurt him. She was trying to connect, and he'd been too scared to meet her halfway. The next morning, David woke up early and made a decision. He found Zira in the kitchen quietly preparing her breakfast. The humming he'd complained about was noticeably absent. "Hey," he said softly, "I need to apologize." Zira glanced up but didn't speak. "I've been a terrible partner," David continued. "You're right. I haven't been trying. I've been treating this like something to endure instead of something to experience. That's not fair to you." "You don't have to pretend," Zira said quietly. "The program doesn't require you to like me, just to coexist. What if I want to do more than coexist?" David pulled out a chair and sat down. "What if I actually tried to understand instead of just judging? Would you be willing to start over?" Zira studied him with those incredible violet eyes, searching for sincerity. Whatever she saw must have convinced her because she gave a small nod. "I would like that." "Good. Then teach me. Start with the humming." "Why does it help you?" For the first time since their fight, Zira's face lit up. "It's how Lyrians regulate our emotional energy. The vibrations help balance our internal systems. When I hum, I'm essentially tuning myself like you might tune a musical instrument." "That actually makes sense." "And the touching things? Lyrians have receptors in our hands that detect subtle energy signatures. When I touch something, I can sense the emotional imprint left by others. It helps me understand spaces and the beings who inhabit them." They talked for over an hour, Zira explaining Lyrian culture while David actually listened. He learned that her people valued harmony above all else, that they believed all consciousness was interconnected, that they saw the universe as one vast, complex organism. "Can I try something?" David asked when she finished. "The emotional sensing thing." "Can you show me?" Zira hesitated. "You've seemed uncomfortable when I've tried before. I know, but I want to understand." She reached across the table slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she placed her long, delicate fingers on the back of his hand. Her skin was surprisingly warm, and he felt a gentle vibration like a cat's purr. "What do you sense?" he asked. "Fear," Zira said softly. "Very old fear. And underneath that, loneliness. But also curiosity. You're curious about me, about my world. You're just scared to show it." David swallowed hard. She was absolutely right, reading him like a book without pages. "That's amazing," he admitted. "And a little terrifying." Zira pulled her hand back with a gentle smile. "Emotional honesty is frightening for many species. Humans especially seem to prefer hiding their feelings. Yeah, we're not great at vulnerability. Neither am I truly. I project confidence, but inside I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'm doing everything wrong, that I'll fail at this bridge-building mission, that I'll never find where I belong." It was the most honest thing either of them had shared. David felt something shift in his chest, like a door he'd kept locked was finally creaking open. "Maybe we can figure it out together," he suggested. "Be terrified together and see what happens?" Zira's smile reached her eyes for the first time in days. "I would like that very much." From that day forward, things started to change. The facility required all participants to attend weekly couples counseling sessions. David had been dreading them since day one, but after his breakthrough with Zira, he found himself actually looking forward to their next appointment. Dr. Kwan, their counselor, was a woman in her 60s who specialized in cross-species psychology. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that put them both at ease. "So," she said, settling into her chair, "how was your week?" David and Zira exchanged glances. 3 weeks ago, they would have given polite, surface-level answers, but something had shifted between them. "Better," David admitted. "We had a fight last week. A real one. But then we talked about it, and things have been different since." Dr. Kwan nodded approvingly. "Conflict is healthy when handled constructively." "What changed after the fight?" "I stopped pretending this was temporary," David said, surprising himself with his honesty. "I stopped treating Zira like a house guest and started treating her like a partner." "And how did that feel?" Dr. Kwan asked Zira. Zira's skin shimmered with a warm glow. "Like finally being seen. David has been asking me questions, trying to understand my culture instead of just tolerating it. It makes me feel less alone." Over the next hour, they talked about their fears and expectations. Dr. Kwan asked difficult questions that made them both uncomfortable, but the discomfort felt productive rather than painful. "David," Dr. Kwan said near the end of the session, "you mentioned earlier that you struggle with emotional connection. Can you tell me more about that?" David felt his defensive walls trying to shoot back up, but he forced them down. If Zira could be vulnerable, so could he. My mom died when I was 12, he said quietly. After that, I just kind of shut down. It seemed easier not to care too much about anyone. Less painful. He felt Zira's hand slip into his, her long fingers wrapping around his palm. The gesture was gentle, supportive, and he didn't pull away. And now? Dr. Kwan prompted. Now I'm realizing that not caring is its own kind of pain. Maybe worse, actually. That evening, David suggested they watch a movie together, something he'd been avoiding because it felt too couple-like, too intimate. They settled on a nature documentary about Earth's oceans, and Zira was mesmerized. Your planet is so beautiful, she whispered, her eyes reflecting the blue water on screen. Lyria has no oceans, only shallow seas. Nothing like this. We could visit one, David suggested impulsively. The facility organizes field trips. We could go to the coast. Zira turned to him with such pure joy that it made his heart skip. Really? You would do that? Yeah, I think I'd like to see it through your eyes. 2 weeks later, they stood on a beach, waves crashing at their feet. It was early morning, and they had the shoreline mostly to themselves. Zira stood transfixed, her small frame dwarfed by the vast ocean before her. It's alive, she breathed, reaching down to touch the water. I can feel it. The emotional energy of millions of life forms, all connected, all moving together. David watched her experience pure wonder, and something in his chest cracked open completely. This small alien who'd been assigned to him by a computer program was teaching him how to feel again, how to be amazed by the world instead of just studying it. Thank you, Zira said suddenly, turning to face him, for bringing me here, for trying. I know this hasn't been easy for you. It hasn't been easy for you either, David pointed out. You left your whole world, your family, everything familiar. I just had to accept a roommate. A wife, Zira corrected with a playful smile. Remember? You've been assigned a wife. David laughed, the sound surprising him. How could I forget? They walked along the beach for hours, collecting shells, watching seabirds, talking about everything and nothing. Zira told him about Lyrian philosophy and art. David shared childhood memories he hadn't thought about in years. The conversation flowed naturally, like they'd known each other far longer than a few months. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zira suddenly went very still. David, I need to tell you something. Her tone made him nervous. What is it? The humming I do around you. It's not just a comfort behavior. Her skin darkened with embarrassment. In Lyrian culture, that specific frequency is a mating signal. A subconscious one. I didn't even realize I was doing it until a few weeks ago. David's brain short-circuited. Wait, what? I'm attracted to you, Zira continued, the words tumbling out quickly. I know that's probably strange and uncomfortable for you. Humans and Lyrians aren't meant to be attracted to each other. The biology is all wrong. But I can't help how I feel, and you deserve to know the truth. She looked terrified, her violet eyes wide and vulnerable. David's heart was racing, his mind spinning with implications and questions and feelings he didn't know how to name. The humming, he said slowly. That beautiful sound that helps me focus when I'm working. That makes the apartment feel like home instead of a sterile facility. That's you being attracted to me? Zira nodded miserably. I can stop if it makes you uncomfortable. David took a step closer to her. What if I told you it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard? Hope flickered across Zira's face. You're not disturbed? Disturbed? Zira, I think about you constantly. The way your eyes change shades when you're happy. How you tilt your head when you're calculating something. The sound of your humming while you work. I didn't know what I was feeling until right now, but I think I'm attracted to you too. But I'm not human, Zira whispered. And I'm not Lyrian. Does that matter? For an answer, Zira reached up on her tiptoes and David leaned down to meet her halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively. It was strange and perfect and unlike anything either of them had experienced before. When they pulled apart, both of them were trembling. Well, David said, his voice shaky. That was unexpected. Zira laughed, the sound like wind chimes. Very unexpected. What do we do now? I have no idea, David admitted. But I think I want to figure it out with you. They spent the rest of the evening on that beach talking about what this meant, where they could possibly go from here. The questions were overwhelming, but having each other made them feel manageable. On the shuttle ride back to the facility, Zira fell asleep against David's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional day. He looked down at her small form, her lavender skin glowing softly in the dim light, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He felt hope. Back at the apartment, things shifted into something new. They weren't just roommates anymore or assigned partners or even friends. They were something unprecedented, something the program probably hadn't anticipated. They started having dinner together every night, really together, trying each other's foods and sharing stories. Zira taught David basic Lyrian meditation techniques that helped with his anxiety. David helped Zira understand human humor and sarcasm, things that didn't translate well in her cultural training. One evening, about a month after the beach trip, David found Zira curled up in her room, her skin flickering erratically. He knocked softly. "Zira, are you okay?" She didn't answer, but he heard a sound like crying. He pushed the door open to find her on the bed, her small body trembling. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "Star longing," she gasped out. "It's a Lyrian condition. Homesickness so severe it causes physical pain. I thought I could manage it, but tonight it's very bad." David's heart ached seeing her in pain. "What can I do? How do I help?" "Nothing. It just has to pass," but David wasn't accepting that answer. He pulled out his tablet and started researching frantically. Star longing, Lyrian homesickness remedies, anything that might help. He found a reference to how seeing familiar star patterns could ease the symptoms. Working quickly, he downloaded a star projection program and configured it to show Lyria's night sky. He dimmed the lights in Zira's room and activated the projection on her ceiling. The effect was immediate. Familiar constellations appeared above them, stars arranged in patterns that Zira had grown up with. Her trembling slowed, her skin beginning to glow with a steadier light. "David," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How did you know?" "I didn't, but I couldn't just watch you hurt." He sat beside her on the bed and she curled into his side, so small against him. They stayed like that for hours, David holding Zira while she watched the stars of her homeworld dance across the ceiling. "Thank you," she murmured eventually, "for caring enough to try." "Of course I care. You're my wife, remember?" She laughed softly through her tears. "Assigned by algorithm. Maybe, but I choose to be here now. That's different, and it was different. Everything was different." They'd started this journey as strangers forced together by bureaucracy. But somewhere along the way, through fights and conversations and vulnerability and trust, they'd become something real, something neither of them wanted to lose. The change in David and Zira's relationship didn't go unnoticed. Other participants in the program started commenting on how well they seemed to work together. The facility staff noted their positive progress reports. Everything seemed perfect, until the outside world caught wind of what was happening. It started with a social media post from another program participant, a photo of David and Zira holding hands during a group activity, with a caption about how beautiful their connection was. The post went viral within hours. Some people thought it was heartwarming, but others had very different reactions. David woke up to dozens of angry messages on his personal accounts. People he'd never met felt entitled to share their opinions about his relationship. Some said he was betraying humanity by being with an alien. Others accused him of having ulterior motives. The comments ranged from ignorant to genuinely hateful. Zira got similar treatment from both humans and Lyrians. Her family finally made contact after months of silence, and the conversation didn't go well. David heard Zira crying in her room after the video call ended. He knocked softly before entering. "Want to talk about it?" Zira sat on her bed, her skin dim and colorless. "My parents are ashamed. They say I'm making a mockery of Lyrian culture by forming a romantic bond with a human, that I'm supposed to be building diplomatic bridges, not romantic ones." David sat beside her, anger burning in his chest. "That's ridiculous. What we have is real. It matters. Does it?" Zira looked at him with exhausted eyes. "Maybe they're right. Maybe we got caught up in proximity and novelty. Maybe this isn't actual love, just two lonely people clinging to each other." "Do you really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore. Everyone is telling us this is wrong, that it can't work, that we're fooling ourselves. What if they're right?" David took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin. "Remember the beach? When you told me about the humming? You said you couldn't help how you felt. I can't either. Everyone outside this room can have their opinions, but they don't get to decide what's real for us. But what kind of future can we possibly have?" Zira's voice cracked. "You're human. I'm Lyrian. Our biologies are completely incompatible. We can't have children together. We'll age at different rates. If we stay together, one of us will have to leave our homeworld permanently.
How do we build a life with all those obstacles?
These were questions David had been avoiding thinking about. But she deserved honest answers, not empty reassurances. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I'd rather figure it out with you than give up because it's difficult. Every relationship has challenges. Ours are just more visible. The facility organized a public forum about the exchange program the following week. David and Zira were required to attend as representatives of successful pairings. Neither of them wanted to go, but it wasn't optional. The auditorium was packed with humans and Lyrians, media representatives, and protesters. David felt Zira trembling beside him as they took their seats on the stage. The moderator asked various participants about their experiences. Most gave polite diplomatic answers about cultural learning and mutual respect. Then the moderator turned to David and Zira. Your pairing has attracted significant attention. How do you respond to critics who say your relationship is inappropriate? Before David could answer, someone in the audience shouted, "They're an embarrassment to both species." Others joined in, some supporting them, others condemning them. The moderator tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Zira's skin had gone nearly translucent with stress. David stood up, pulling Zira up with him. Their height difference was almost comical, but he didn't care. He held her hand and faced the crowd. You want to know how we respond? His voice carried across the auditorium. We respond by choosing each other anyway. Yes, we're different. Yes, there are challenges. But love doesn't require sameness. It requires respect, effort, and willingness to grow. Zira has taught me more about being human than any human ever did. She's taught me to feel again, to hope again, to believe that connection matters more than comfort. He felt Zira squeeze his hand. Every relationship requires bridging differences, he continued. Different personalities, different backgrounds, different ways of seeing the world. Our differences are just more visible. But that doesn't make what we have any less real or valuable. Zira stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. On Lyria, we believe all consciousness is interconnected. That separation is an illusion. David helped me understand that humans believe something similar, in different words. You talk about empathy, about walking in someone else's shoes, about love transcending boundaries. We're living proof that those aren't just pretty words. They're possible if we're brave enough to try. The auditorium erupted in mixed reactions, some applauding, others shouting. But David didn't care about any of them. He only cared about the small alien beside him, who'd cracked open his heart and made him believe in tomorrow again. Despite the public controversy, life inside the facility continued. David and Zira developed their own rhythms and traditions, creating something uniquely theirs. They started combining human and Lyrian customs in ways that made them both happy. Sunday mornings became their favorite. David would make coffee while Zira prepared her glowing breakfast. They'd sit by the window, sharing comfortable silence broken occasionally by conversation. Zira would hum softly, and David would rest his hand on the table where she could sense his contentment through the surface. They celebrated both human and Lyrian holidays, making up their own traditions when existing.